Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep and cracking the code on our feelings. We're going to explore the hidden science that, really shapes how we all experience the world.
So let's just kick things off with a little puzzle. We all use these big words, right? Happy, sad, angry. But have you ever stopped to wonder, is your experience of happy the exact same as mine? Well, the science says probably not. It turns out your internal emotional world is completely, totally your own.
Okay, check this out. It's a really fascinating comparison. Just think about the color red for a second. Even though the cells in our eyes that see red are pretty much identical, studies have shown that what you think of as the most intense red is actually different from what I see. And guess what? The exact same thing is true for our emotions. Your peak happiness, that feeling inside, it's fundamentally different than mine.
So that raises a huge question, right? If emotions are so personal, so subjective, how in the world can we even begin to study them? Well, it turns out we can't. We just have to start by looking at their blueprint, how they're built, right from the very beginning of our lives.
Okay, so let's go way back. Our emotional journey kicks off the moment we're born. As tiny little infants, we have zero real understanding of the world around us. Our entire experience is defined by this really simple but incredibly powerful dynamic. It's a dance between what's happening inside our own bodies and how the outside world responds to it.
As babies, our very first sensations are purely internal. Am I hungry? Am I cold? Am I tired? Neuroscientists have a name for this state: interoception. It's basically just paying attention to what's going on inside your body. And believe it or not, this is the absolute foundation of our entire emotional life.
So imagine this. An infant feels an internal need, maybe hunger, maybe cold. For them, it just registers as anxiety. They don't know what they need. They just feel this spike in alertness. So what do? They cry out. And this right here, this is the crucial moment. It's where they learn to signal their internal state to the outside world, forming their very first bonds and starting to learn, hey, if I do this, will someone respond, and how?
Now, this whole process of forming bonds was actually observed in a really famous classic experiment. It was run by psychologists Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, and they called it the strange situation. And what it did was reveal these really distinct patterns in how kids connect with their caregivers.
So in the experiment, the researchers just watched what happened when a caregiver left a kid alone for a bit and then came back. And the reactions were, wow, they were telling. You had some babies who they labeled secure, and they were just delighted to see their caregiver return. Then you had others, the avoidant ones, who kind of just ignored them and kept playing. A third group, called ambivalent, actually got angry. And finally, you had a few who were disorganized. They just avoided everybody. Now, these aren't just random cute baby reactions. No way. They are the earliest blueprints for how we learn to manage our emotions and relationships for the rest of our lives.
All right, so from those very first attachments, let's fast forward quite a bit. We're going to leap forward to our next massive emotional rewiring, puberty. And let's be real, it's a biological and psychological earthquake. This is so much more than just physical changes. It's a complete and total overhaul of our brain's entire emotional landscape.
And the whole thing is this incredibly precise hormonal chain reaction that actually starts in the brain. There's a molecule called kisspeptin, and it's the one that kicks everything off. That leads to this whole cascade of other hormones that ultimately triggers the production of testosterone or estrogen. And that, in turn, fundamentally alters our bodies, our brains, and even our social drives.
So this huge biological shift, it fuels a really profound psychological one. Scientists call it a drive for dispersal. Basically, it's this intense desire to pull away from your primary caregivers and spend way more time with your peers. Sound familiar? Yeah. Adolescence becomes this time of testing. You're testing social interactions, you're testing out new emotional responses, and you're really testing your own independence.
Okay, so as we keep maturing and start forming these really complex social bonds, our relationships are governed by this delicate dance of neurochemicals. And if we can understand these little molecules, it really helps us understand all the different flavors of connection we feel throughout our lives. Healthy relationships often kind of seesaw between two key systems in our brain. First, you have the dopamine system. This is what drives excitement, motivation, and that what's next feeling of adventure. But on the other side of the seesaw, you've got the serotonin system. This one's all about calm, contentment, and that pleasure you get from just being in the moment. That really soothing feeling of just being together. And it doesn't stop there. We've got other crucial molecules in the mix. There's oxytocin. You've probably heard of it as the trust hormone. It really boosts our ability to communicate in a positive way and to tune in to how our partner is feeling. Then there's vasopressin, which plays a huge role in pair bonding. In fact, this is pretty wild. Studies on prairie voles showed that the levels of this one hormone could literally predict whether they'd be monogamous or not.
All right, so we've seen how our emotions are built from the ground up. Now, let's get practical. Let's unpack a really powerful framework that you can actually use to understand what you're feeling in any given moment. Think of it like a toolkit for mapping your own inner world.
So the key to using this toolkit is to stop thinking in simple labels like sad or angry, and instead start breaking down your feelings. The very first axis to think about is arousal. This is just your energy level. On a scale of 1 to 10, are you calm and kind of drowsy, or are you in a full-blown panic and totally hyper-alert?
Okay, number 2, consider the valence. This is just the value you place on the feeling. Does it feel good or does it feel bad? Is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? Simple as that.
And finally, axis number 3, where is your focus? Is your attention turned inward, on your racing heart? That's interoception again. Or is your attention directed outward, at the world around you, at the person you're talking to? That's exteroception. And believe it or not, together, these 3 things, arousal, valence, and focus, can pretty much describe any emotional state you ever experience. Now, the real power of this framework is just brilliantly illustrated by the story of a patient named Sally. She was suffering from this really severe treatment-resistant depression, and her description for it was going pancake, just completely, totally flat and devoid of any energy.
So her doctors decided to try something radical. They decided to target just one of those axes, arousal. They used a small implanted device to slightly increase the electrical stimulation of her vagus nerve. And here's a fun fact. Contrary to what a lot of people think, stimulating the vagus nerve actually increases alertness. It doesn't just make you calm.
And the result was absolutely astonishing. I mean, within minutes of just slightly increasing that stimulation, Sally's entire emotional state transformed. Her frown literally disappeared, she became cheerful, and she started talking about happy memories from the holidays. Just by shifting her position on that one single axis, the arousal axis, her whole experience of depression was completely altered in that moment.
Sally's story just perfectly illustrates the big takeaway here. Our emotions aren't these simple, single labels like sad or happy. No, they are dynamic combinations of arousal, valence, and focus. And understanding this, really getting this, gives you an incredibly powerful tool, not just for self-awareness, but for maybe even changing how you feel.
So understanding these building blocks really does equip you to better navigate your own internal landscape. It's like being handed a map to a world you've lived in your whole life but never really understood. And so the real question becomes, now that you have the tools, now that you have the map, how are you going to explore your own emotional world?